pleased to join me, first of all, Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and the National Director of the ADL. Welcome, Jonathan. And my friend and colleague from the Foreign Ministry, Rudy is the Director of Combating Antisemitism and Holocaust Remembrance at the Foreign Ministry, and of course the Deputy Mayor of the City of the Israel Witness Council. And ladies, well, I'm very glad to see three ladies on stage. We'll continue the discussion. Jonathan.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Ambassador, for the nice setup here. It's such a pleasure to follow you, and to follow my friend Tom Nides, and to follow Mr. Chai, and of course, to follow my good friend Deborah Lipstadt. And I will just use this opportunity to say what a privilege it is for me as an American citizen to be represented by you, your scholarship, your smartness. So we're lucky to have her, and I'm just a blessing to have her here this morning. The ADL, many of you know it, it's the oldest anti-hate organization in the US. We've been fighting anti-Semitism for almost 110 years. And I think as you heard from Ambassador Lipstadt, I'll just elaborate a little bit and pass it on. Look, the issues are real. Something has changed in the US and around the world. Something definitely has changed. In 2021, the ADL recorded the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents we've ever seen in American history. 2,717 acts, a 34% increase over the prior year. The ADL is on the ground with 25 offices across America, literally investigating, responding, engaging with law enforcement, with elected officials. We investigated over 9,600 incidents last year. Again, 2,700 plus turned out to be real. Many others might have been anti-Black, anti-Asian, other hate crimes. The number last year was almost triple the number in 2015. And the people attacking Jews in broad daylight with impunity in Midtown Manhattan, in Los Angeles, California, in South Florida, in Chicago, in Las Vegas. They weren't wearing MAGA hats, right? Some of them were wearing Palestinian tortillas. Now I would say, like Tom, I am pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel. I am an unabashed, unapologetic Zionist all the way through. But make no mistake, the people who are contributing to this rise in anti-Semitism, as Deborah said, it is coming from all sides. It is coming from all sides. It's not only in America. Germany, according to our counterparts at RIAS, reported over 2,780 incidents last year, the highest number they've seen in more than a decade. Our counterparts at the CRIF in Paris reported a historic number of incidents in France. Our counterparts at the Community Security Trust, or CST in the UK, reported a record number of incidents as well. This is happening all over the world. I think the polarization, which you have again in many countries, is driving this. I think the failure of systems, markets, governments, to deal with COVID, the economy, creates an environment in which, as Deborah said, scapegoating spreads and conspiracy theories really prosper. And so the Jews, again, are the oldest, we call anti-Semitism the oldest hatred. It's the oldest conspiracy theory. It's always easy to blame the Jews. You know, or to concoct some fiction in which you can blame the Jews, as we see Putin doing to excuse, to rationalize his heinous, grotesque invasion of Ukraine. So we are deeply concerned about why this is happening. Again, we cannot control, I think, the global polarization the failure of systems, the receding memory of the Holocaust. I will say social media is a super spreader of online hate and harassment. And I know you're going to hear about it from my friend Noah and others in the next panel. I'm glad Jordana is here from Meta, and I'm sure we'll be able to respond to some of it. But the ADL, we track offline anti-Semitism and online anti-Semitism. We are deeply disturbed by the trends in the gaming space, in the VR space. These places have no moderation policies, no controls. It's like building fleets of cars, not without seatbelts, without brakes. So we shouldn't be surprised when you build these kinds of products without the right systems and security that this is what happens. But again, I know, Noah, you're going to talk about that, but we've got lots of data, and it is all disturbing. And you know, Deborah wrote something, I think, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, which she paraphrased. Anti-Semitism starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. Truer words were never spoken. Because in an environment where you can blame the Jews, you'll blame everyone else. In online environments, you can attack the Jews with impunity, as has happened for years. Now we see it, LGBTQ populations, Asian American populations. Again, the level of sort of invective directed at them is worse than what we see directed at the Jewish community online. I'll just say 2 quick last points and pass it on. Number one, I appreciate again what Deborah said. Don't fall in the trap of saying this is all the left, or this is all the right, or this is all the radical jihadists, or this is all the Christian fundamentalists or whatnot. It comes from everywhere. There's no better indication, demonstration than what we saw in Boston in the past few weeks. This past weekend, sorry, what's today? It's the 5th, right? Yesterday, on July 4th, over 100 white supremacists marched out in the open in Boston, Massachusetts, with the State House behind them, from a group called the Patriot Front, a nasty white supremacist group in America that split off from one of the main organizers of the Charlottesville rally. Many of you may have seen 31 members were arrested a few weeks ago in Idaho. They were going to break up an LGBTQ pride rally. So these 100 people marched out in the open in Boston, Massachusetts yesterday. And then a few weeks earlier, we were dealing with something called the Mapping Project in Boston, which I'm sure I'm seeing some people nodding. An anonymous group of activists, I use that term loosely, doxed the Boston Jewish community. Under a report they called it Zionism, Empire, and Oppression. They blamed all these different actors in the Boston Jewish community for, quote, devastation. And they said, and now I'm paraphrasing, every network has an address, every address can be disrupted, every organization can be dismantled. And so who do they blame for this? Who do they purport this slander against? The Jewish Community Center of Boston, the Jewish Day School, the synagogues. How did this happen? That you blame the synagogues for the devastation and colonization, quote unquote? It's because for years we've seen this in some elements of the anti-Israel community. NGOs in the US have been saying this kind of thing. Anti-Israel NGOs have been saying this for years with no one stopping them, with no one protesting, so it's become table stakes in some communities. Last point. This discussion is supposed to be about the Abraham Accords. I think why the Abraham Accords are so important is because it's people-to-people driven diplomacy. And the delegitimization of Israel is one of the main vectors of anti-Semitism in the 21st century. Mind you, much of this anti-Zionism was developed in the Soviet Union, so it actually isn't new. It's like an old wine in new bottles. Nonetheless, if we can, and we're already seeing it at ADL, we're working with KSA, we're working with UAE and other Gulf countries to look at the anti-Semitism in their textbooks. And so the fact that they're now participating in this process with Israel, slowing the flow of poison, can be very helpful in terms of creating an environment more conducive to Jews worldwide.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like to comment on 2 things you've said. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism especially is becoming a part of the mainstream discourse, not just on the right and on the left. You can hear politicians that sometimes are not aware of what they're saying, talking anti-Semitism when they're talking about Israel. And yes, not every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, I absolutely agree. But some of the criticism that is generated against Israel, especially in the UN arena and in some other international arenas, if you scratch the surface, you'll find anti-Semitism. And there is no doubt in my mind that some of those who are generating that type of criticism are not really worried, let's say, about the rights of the Palestinians or the rights of this or that. They're really targeting Israel. And Israel because it's a Jewish state. Sorry about my voice, it's a bit scratchy because of my COVID. One more thing I would like to comment is about Zionism. I really appreciate you saying very out loud that you're a Zionist. Very often the term Zionist or Zionism is being a replacement for addressing Judaism or Jewish. So you hear anti-Semites using Zionists instead of Jews, and this you hear a lot in anti-Semitism generated in the Islamic arena. And the last thing is anti-Zionism is actually a very brutal, or I don't know how to use a more strong term, limitation of a person's self-determination right. Every person has the right to determine for themselves who they are. And if a Jew in Toronto, in Massachusetts, or in Paris wants to determine themselves as Zionist, that's a basic right. And this is where I believe we need to move the discussion that anti-Semitism is a violation of a basic human right. Now to the topic of our panel. We wanted to speak about the Abraham Accord and their role in changing the atmosphere. There is a major change in the atmosphere, and the role of Abraham Accord is very important. We see a change in the Gulf countries that is coming out from there because of this connection between people to people. The issue of tolerance and coexistence is a very core issue, a very core topic in our discussion with our counterparts in the Gulf countries. And the name actually, the Abraham Accord, Eskemei Avraham, relates to the very basic common ground that we have with those countries. Abraham is our common father. We see in Bahrain the center of the King Hamad, who signed an MOU with the former envoy regarding the combating of anti-Semitism, as well as Merkaz Mimuna in Morocco, who did the same thing, claiming for committing for combating anti-Semitism. And we see that these points are not less important than our common interests with those countries. The economic, the geopolitical, the strategic or security, the issues of coexistence and tolerance are an important element in our relations with them. In Bahrain, by the way, there is the Jewish community, one of the more ancient Jewish communities, and a synagogue since the 30s of the last century. So this is something to think about. We also have the important role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in this, not only in having the embassies and having our diplomats working on the grounds, but also in the initiative of the Negev Forum. And the Negev Forum has convened just about a week ago, and one of the topics of the 6 working groups is combating anti-Semitism and promoting coexistence and religious tolerance. So, looking at all this, by the way, in Geneva last week, this is a really good example. In Geneva last week, next to the United Nations Human Rights Council, our mission in Geneva has organized an event to showcase to present the strategy on anti-Semitism of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion, Mr. Ahmed Shahid. And in that event, Morocco and the UAE have sponsored this event, and this is something to talk about. And not only that, the Palestinian representative in Geneva participated in that discussion. Of course, she attacked everything, including the IRA definition, but she was in the room together with many other ambassadors, and this is something to note. This is a change. This is something we could dream about a few years ago before the Abraham Accords. Saying all that and looking at all this positive angle, I would like to point at two things regarding anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. This is something we need to look at and call it a name, because if you don't call it a name, you cannot combat it or eradicate it. So there is a very basic anti-Jewish hatred or anti-Semitism within the Muslim world, which within the years has changed its face and is dressed as anti-Zionism and anti-Israel. And this is something that Saudi Arabia was one of the most core players in generating that type of anti-Semitism and radicalizing Muslims around the world. And the main problem is today with social media, this is accessible to Muslims all over the world, and this generates radicalization of Muslim communities around the world, and it spills over to those communities and becomes a real threat and a real challenge to Jewish communities in those countries. We could see it very well in Malmö in Sweden, in Paris in France, and in other countries. We could see it very well during our last escalation in Gaza, Shomer HaChomot, when demonstrations against, so-called against Israel, were directed at Jewish communities in the United States and in Europe, in Australia, and in Canada, where we never thought this would happen. So looking at all that, there is a good angle when we have partners in the Gulf countries and in other countries. Morocco and also Egypt is in the circle, and hopefully Saudi Arabia will join us as well in combating anti-Semitism, because this is not something that one country can do, and the leadership of the United States is really important, but we need a coalition. We need a coalition of many countries together, and this is where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can be a major player, but we also need a coalition between governments, social organizations, civil society organizations, academia, and of course the technology companies, because what we see now in social media will be a totally different story when the metaverse enters and will be a part of our lives. As my former boss used to call it, it will be social media on steroids. So this is something to take into consideration, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back at the university. I did my master's here, Yossi, so I think I deserve a student card as well. It's really wonderful to be here with such an esteemed panel. Ambassador Lipstadt, I was a law student in London when you were going through that horrible case which you won, and we were all standing on the sides cheering you on. You're a hero. You're a real hero. And it's such a pleasure to be here on the same panel. Jonathan Greenblatt, last year, I was one of the politicians that led a mission of, we call it a reverse mission because we're always used to our friends and family in the United States coming here to show empathy with the state of Israel. We decided to do something different. Myself and another few colleagues, we have here also esteemed journalists who came with us, to see what's going on with anti-Semitism in the United States, and you received us and you put our heads straight and you told us exactly what's going on. And we left even more worried than we got there. But at least we can start talking about it and do something about it. Of course, Minister Nachman Shai, who's doing really one of the few Israeli politicians that really understands the diaspora from the Kishkis. Thank you for your work. And the incredible Noah Tishby, who's using her celebrity and her credibility in Hollywood to defend the state of Israel. This is not a given. It destroys careers. So thank you, Noah, for being our ally. So I'll talk a little bit about the Abraham Accords and what it's done and where I see this whole thing heading in terms of anti-Semitism. About 2 years ago, I spent a lot of months speaking with the American Embassy in Jerusalem. By the way, I want to wish the United States a happy Yom Ha'atzmaut, yesterday, 4th of July, and happy celebration, and thank you so much to the incredible team, Kim, Felicity, and of course, the inimitable Ambassador Tom Rice, who's such a joy to have in our city. So anyway, 2 years ago, about this time, a friend of mine and I were talking about the Gulf, and we understood something was cooking. We didn't really understand how fast it was going to happen. And we thought to ourselves, there's a lot of under-the-radar normalization going on between Israel and the Gulf. There's 200 plus companies, Israeli companies operating in the Gulf. Something's cooking here. We just didn't understand it was going to happen so quickly. And so my colleague and I, Dorian Barak, we co-founded the UAE Israel Business Council to create a setup of businesses who wanted to talk to each other. No politics, let's just talk business and see where we go from there. Of course, our purpose was to do the bridge building that needed to be done, but business was a very nice, neutral way of starting to create those relationships. A month later, the Abraham Accords were announced. We were in shock. And we created the first online platform for businesses to talk to each other. 2 weeks later, another colleague and I, Justine Zwirling, who's head of capital markets for the London Stock Exchange, here, said we have to create something for women. Because if women are in charge, we may actually have a warm peace. So we created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, and we have your esteemed colleague, Carol, who's part of that group. And so we really started the people-to-people normalization and peacemaking. So my first trip, I met an incredible man in the UAE called Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri. And he is the first Emirati, or the first person in the Muslim world to talk about the fact that there are Jews that are indigenous in the Middle East. And so he had, and Ambassador Lipstadt, I'm really happy to connect you to him, because he's done incredible work. So he had this exhibition in his museum. He's got a museum called the Crossroads of Civilization Museum, and so he has a whole section called the Holy Land. So he didn't want to call it Israel, Palestine, whatever, the Holy Land. And so he had their artifacts, Jewish artifacts from the Middle East, which was incredible. A few months later, we do an event together with my UAE Israel Business Council and a group of Sephardi organizations that want to talk about the Sephardi presence in the Middle East. You know, Bahrain was mentioned as an example. Bahrain is a community that's been there for a few hundred years, Iraqi Jews originally. And so the minute you talk about Jews being indigenous of this region, then you neutralize the accusations of the white colonizers of a country that isn't ours, which is such a pivotal part of this anti-Semitic rhetoric that you hear constantly. And so that was our mission. Our mission is, let's talk about the indigenous Jews from the region. And my mother comes from Morocco, my family comes from Spain, Muslim Spain, where we lived in peace and harmony with Muslims. And so this is kind of the movement that I was one of the leaders of. And Ahmed said, let's do an event in our museum. So we did this event talking about common heritage, rebuilding Abraham's tent. That's what we called it. It was very successful, and a few months later, Ahmed calls me up and says, Fla, I want to do something different. I said, what? I want to open a Holocaust exhibition in my museum. Now, imagine the significance of this. A Holocaust exhibition, the first ever in the Muslim/Arab world, by this man, this incredible man called Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri, to change the discourse of the Middle East. So he started with the indigenous presence, and he moved over to recognizing the Holocaust. And so Ahmed this year has already done 3 Holocaust events at his museum. The German ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, Marcy, was incredible. All of these ambassadors who come, show up, funded by the UAE government. This is what's happening in the Abraham Accords. And these are the positive developments. But let me just go back to the work that needs to be done. Ambassador Lipstadt, you spoke about how people in certain categories don't recognize the anti-Semitism in their category. So the liberals will say it's the right wing, the right wing will say it's the academic left wing, but we all have a blind spot, and that is the anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. We don't talked about it enough because somehow we feel that we become prejudiced by talking about it, or somehow we feel that because there's an Arab-Israeli conflict going on, that justifies Muslim world anti-Semitism, and that is absolutely not acceptable. And let me tell you where the positive developments are and where we still have a lot of work to do. The positive developments are this. The UAE, I asked a lot of my friends and colleagues in the UAE, when did anti-Semitism, when was it taken out of your school book? About 10 years ago. So imagine that, it takes 10 years to wash out that indoctrination that happens from the age of 4, 5, 6 years old from the school book, 10 years. When on my second or third trip to Dubai, I met this wonderful, lovely young woman, 19, 20 years old, and she said to me, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, anything you want." She said, "Is it true that Jews cut trees because when Allah comes to liberate Palestine, Jews will be hiding behind trees and the trees will say, 'Here are the Jews hiding behind us'?" I said, "Where did you learn this?" I said, "In school." I said, "When?" 10 years ago. This is what's going on, and we don't talk about it, nobody talks about it. So the UAE stamped out anti-Semitism from the school book 10 years ago. Saudi Arabia stamped out anti-Semitism from the school book a year ago. A year ago. The Palestinian Authority has not yet stamped out anti-Semitism from its school book. I know this because in my city, there's 1 million people, 40% of my constituents are Arabs living in East Jerusalem, and their school books are the Palestinian school books, contaminated with anti-Semitism and funded by the entire international community through UNRWA. And this is what nobody talks about. And then we're surprised when we see somebody walking around the old city with a knife, a 15-year-old who takes his mother's kitchen knife and wants to go out and kill Jews. And UNRWA is funded by the entire world, and 58% of the funding of UNRWA goes to the Palestinian education system. Now, I'm not saying don't fund UNRWA. I'm saying one thing, and I want to declare it from here. Fund UNRWA on condition that they change their school books and take out the hatred and incitement. Please, because if we don't do this, there's no hope of peace. There's no hope of peace. So I know that the international community do this from a good place. You don't know it. Most people don't understand this. You're doing it from a good place. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it with a very clear condition. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Two very short comments before we ask Deborah to close this session. Listening to Jonathan, I couldn't but reflect on my years as ambassador to France, ambassador in Paris. I arrived in Paris shortly before the massacre of the school children in Toulouse, and I ended up my mission in Paris not long after the Charlie Hebdo and the Jewish supermarché, and I remember the level of anxiety among my fellow Jews in France and the tens of thousands of French Jews that were fleeing either to Israel or to the United Kingdom. Now, of course, I I'd love to see every Jew come here, live with us, but I want them to do it out of their free will and not because they are prosecuted. And throughout this year, it was terrible to watch the dramatic surge in the number of anti-Semitic incidents in France. Everything from desecrating the cemeteries to trying to burn synagogues. And believe you me, there was a very, very frightening moments to being in Paris at that time. Second, listening to Fleur, I remember my first visit to Manama. Nowadays, everybody travels to Bahrain, but I was really lucky to be leading the first official Israeli delegation to Bahrain. Many, many years back, I was the head of the negotiating team on the environment, and Bahrain hosted us. And the thing I remember most is calling our Minister of the Environment, the late Yossi Sarid. And I call him from Manama, and I say, Yossi, shalom, this is Yossi, I'm calling from Manama. And the level of excitement of Yossi Sarid, he was minutes later interviewed on Kol Israel, I believe, and he spoke only about the miracle of Yossi speaking to Yossi, one in Manama and one in Tel Aviv. So I believe that this opening to the Gulf and to Morocco and other partners and to Saudi Arabia really offer tremendous opportunities. Deborah, it's yours to close this session.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to my panelists and my fellow panelists. And just a couple of comments, a couple of things that I want to highlight because I don't want to repeat what you said. What you said was really good, and you said it well. But I think Jonathan Greenblatt described for us what I would call a perfect storm. And the fact that these white supremacists or people, not just the white supremacists, but people feel free to do this thing is really disturbing. One of the groups on that mapping project was the Orthodox Union, the OU's Office for Helping People with Disabilities. That's, you know, and there are lots of other examples I can give, but it's so striking. It was pure, unadulterated anti-Semitism. Now, many people decried it, but they'll figure out a way to do it in a way that will be slightly less in your face, and we will see more of it. Ruti, you mentioned the change in Geneva. Look, and you mentioned UNRWA. The UN has lots of problems. UNRWA in Geneva, condemnations, even though we've seen some changes. I'm not saying that all in the UN is fine and dandy, but I think we also have to grab on to the work like Ahmed Shahid's, because not only as Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid, who's become a very good friend, was his analysis, his report important, but his action plan. He came out, I think, 8-point action plan. Read it, go look at it. It's a plan for combating anti-Semitism. And now followed by Secretary Mauritanis, I'm blocking on his exact title, but who has been appointed by the Secretary General to further this issue. And again, to address this issue, my country has a very terrific ambassador at the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who is really devoted to addressing this. She and I convened a group of special envoys just a few weeks ago. Ruti was there, Noah was there, others were there, and she made clear her commitment to fighting this. I spent time just earlier this week, I want to mention it, with the parents of Hadar Golden. I met with them in Washington. I met with them here in Jerusalem. And they talked about how Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, former UN ambassador, now USID Samantha Power, are addressing and trying to work with them. But in the UN, which has been so long the bastion of hostility, we see changes. I'm not ignoring the bad stuff, but we have to celebrate the good stuff to hold their feet to the fire to act on these things. And finally, you're right, all of you are right, there's a change of discourse in the Middle East. I'm not ready to sing Kumbaya and say all is well, but things are changing. And one of the most interesting comments I heard from a very high-ranking Saudi official, representative of the government, member of the royal family, when we mentioned the textbooks, I expect her to say, yes, we changed, they made, I think, 120,000 changes in the textbooks, and acknowledge that there's still stuff that needs to be changed. They don't say, finished. Kamarnu, we're done, but what did she say when we mentioned the textbooks? She says, but the textbooks, changing the textbooks is not enough. We have to change the culture around the textbooks, the teachers who teach the textbooks, the parents. So there is change, and I think we have to celebrate it, we have to work with it, and we have to hope that nothing will happen that could easily implode it. And that is something of major concern to my country, and I know many people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one very short question and an even shorter answer. So please.
I just want to acknowledge, so we talk about dealing in the changes there, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge one of the people who has most ferociously defended the state of Israel's interests, the Jewish people's interests in Geneva. That's Hill in Europe, if you want to watch.
You can stand up then so that you can. Very short, Shoshana, very short question.
Okay. Hi, my cousin was directly named on the mapping project, and he's scared for his physical safety when he goes to work. When he's at home, it's very disturbing. And if you haven't seen it, it's what I imagine Hitler would have wanted in the 30s, where you can find out where the bad Jews are. And I was wondering how your organizations are using technology, how the bad guys are using technology in this super creative, innovative way to combat anti-Semitism, and how, as someone who's made Aliyah, how I individually can make a difference. Thank you.
So I'll say very quickly to Nikos' start. Shoshana, let's make sure you touch base with Carol after the panel so you can figure out who your cousin is. Yeah, this mapping project is sickening. And so this should basically, to anyone who's confused about whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, this is Exhibit A. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Period. End of story. So the ADL is so concerned. I mean, again, I say this respectfully to some people in the audience, but look, social media is a super spreader, but we can't just yell at the companies, we have to work with them. So ADL opened a center in Silicon Valley in 2017. We have, product managers and data scientists and software engineers working for us now. We're working with all the companies from Alphabet to Zoom, right? From the e-commerce companies, the social media services, to the gaming platforms, to the messaging services. Sometimes I would rather do stuff behind the scenes and fix it, Shoshana, and sometimes it happens out in front. And so we've had some run-ins with Facebook and a few other companies like that. But the bottom line is we have to work with them, and if we can't get them to change, we have to get the government involved. Last thing I'll say to your question is, ADL, we are working with the FBI to find out who's behind the mapping project. We got them kicked off their hosting company in Michigan. They moved to Bulgaria. Guess who knows the Prime Minister of Bulgaria? Now they're on a service in Iceland. And if I have my way, I'll run them all the way to Moscow or to Tehran, God willing, until we figure out who these people are. Because freedom of expression, which is a cherished value in the United States and in Israel democracies, is not the freedom of incitement. Freedom of speech is not the freedom to slander and threaten. What the Mapping Project did is borderline illegal, and we're going to try to make that case in court.
Just a final comment on the Mapping Project. It's going to sound very weird. I'm almost glad it happened. I'm not really glad it happened. But it suddenly it's almost like Charlottesville. Charlottesville was terrible. A woman was murdered. People were injured, physically injured. It's still bad, those injuries to today. But it brought something out from behind the scenes and made it very clear. what is there. And so, you know, what I've heard, it didn't happen, of course, but it highlighted the problem in a way that 1,000 speeches, 1,000 seminars could never do.
Well, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, John. Thank you.